Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me in another video. So Hermes gets to continue sitting on their high horse for another quarter. As it has been anticipated, they are doing very, very well. Despite earlier this year, there was that whole lawsuit. I think it only further drew attention to how highly coveted these bags continue to be, the lengths people will go to obtain one of these special pieces, which I think at this scale is unlike any other brand. Hermes has continued to create some of the most sought after bags on the market. And sure, we have the Louis Vuittons, the Chanels, the Diors, the Gucci's. While we don't know the exact earnings of every single brand, at least at LVMH, we know they are experiencing a decline in the fashion and leather goods segment. Kering as well, we've seen pretty much with the exception of Bottega Veneta, for the most part, from the brands that they specifically release their earnings on, they are also declining in terms of revenue. And then on the flip side, we have Hermes has generated 3.7 billion euros in Q4 at 11.3% rise from where they were last year. So in Q3 2023, they did 11.3% better in Q3 2024. If you haven't been watching my recent videos, please check them out. I did LVMH, I did Kering, but both of these conglomerates, specifically in the leather goods sector, they're experiencing a huge slump. And what's even more, Hermes is actually doing better than what even the analysts had expected. They were expecting a 10.5% growth, so they're even beating these expectations at the 11.3% rise. And this from the CEO, Axel Dumas. In a more uncertain economic and geopolitical context, I want to thank all employees for the robust third quarter performance and our customers for their loyalty. Thanks to the singularity of its model, Hermes is continuing its recruitments and long-term investments. When we look at these statements from these CEOs, from be it François-Henri Pinault or Bernard Arnault, there's a totally different tone here. And from region to region, we're also seeing that Hermes continues to crush each region. So Asia, excluding Japan, so they're up 7%, supported by solid sales in Korea, Singapore, Australia, and Thailand. The region is growing in the third quarter despite the downturn in traffic in Greater China observed since the end of the Chinese New Year and a high base in the third quarter last year. You hear about how at LVMH and Kering specifically, they're experiencing a slump with China. This from Jing Daily. In contrast, Hermes's resilience showcases the advantages of a diversified product line and a measured approach to growth. Despite observing a slight dip in the Greater China post-Chinese New Year, Hermes maintained steady gains in the region, buoyed by continued strong performance in Korea, Singapore, and Australia. This demonstrates the effectiveness of a balanced market strategy, relying not just on China, but on broader Asia-Pacific presence. And while there is a downturn in spending in China, Hermes has been able to maintain its appeal to high net worth customers. So while Hermes has experienced a downturn in China, Hermes has actually been able to maintain a appeal to high net worth customers. Quote, high net worth customers, particularly in China, are becoming more selective, gravitating towards brands that emphasize heritage, sustainability, and cultural engagement over ostentation. Hermes's emphasis on craftsmanship and balanced distribution network, including local investment in key markets like Japan, has allowed it to maintain growth despite broader industry challenges. And I think another trend that I talked about in another video was the appeal of these more accessibly priced, not as highly priced, mid-tier brands, contemporary brands that still offer just as good quality, probably in some cases maybe even better quality, unique design, interesting storytelling. I was reading another article. They were talking about the rise of these brands like Coach, Tory Burch. They had mentioned the brand MCM, which I thought was also very interesting. This is South Korea's Sungju group. So this is actually originally a German brand, but I can see why more customers are going locally. I think this is something that a lot of luxury brands are trying to grapple with, the rise of these emerging mid-tier brands. But Hermes, because they're kind of the top of the food chain in many ways, for those specific high net worth customers that are willing to spend more, it just feels more worth it for many to buy an Hermes bag rather than a bag from Dior, which has creeped up in price, but it doesn't feel as high quality.
There's yet another good resilient quarter, another quarter of outperformance for Hermes. I think it is still well worth noting that in terms of quarterly revenue growth at constant currency, it's a little bit weaker than previous quarters, but we're still talking about double digits, which is something that some of its peers would only really dream of. And so it is bucking the trend. It does seem that way. There's still a little bit of weakness in China, so sales in Europe, the Americas, Japan, that all exceeded estimates. But if we look at the region including China, that came in below estimates. So the fact that the consumer confidence in China is kind of reaching pandemic lows, it does still have an impact on Hermes, even though it keeps that kind of edge over its peers regardless.
But it feels like so much of the edge is really just coming down to the Birkin bag. And we've been talking about this for years now in terms of what's going to make a dent into the wealthiest echelon of consumer. Do we have any clues on that?
Well, Hermes, the reason why it's been really able to withstand that pressure is, as you said, is because it's just so high end. You know, that means that it comes with a kind of a loyal customer base. It comes with an exclusive price point. You know, if you can afford a Birkin bag, you can afford it regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the economic slowdown. Resilience comes with being really high end, and it's going to be a bit more difficult for the companies that are a bit more aspirational, and we can see that with Gucci also.
They also talk about how in Japan they had strong growth there, and that is across the board. In the Americas, they're also experiencing a 13% growth. They continued their solid momentum in the third quarter with growth close to the previous 2 quarters, and online sales continued their development with the extension into Mexico in September. So in Europe, excluding France, they mention how there's solid local demand as well as greater demand from tourists. And then in France, they have sustained momentum. They're up 14% at a slight slowdown in traffic in Parisian stores due to the Olympic Games. Now, if we look at sales by sector, I think this will not be a surprise, but all the métiers, with the exception of watches, had solid growth. So, of course, we have the leather goods and saddlery. Of course, that's where their handbags come in. Even just their newer iterations or recent different takes on core classic pieces, the Constance Elan, or they also highlight the Bolide Ado. They also mentioned how they've upped their production capacity. They have plans to continue increasing it, opening up their 23rd leather goods workshop in Riom in the Puy de Dôme in September. Sorry if I mispronounced that. They also highlight how their ready-to-wear has done well. They also pinpoint their men's ready-to-wear. I feel like with the rise of menswear, as well as I feel there's just also been an uptick of men wanting to buy more into handbags, probably more so than ever. We're also seeing this with like celebrities. It's been there, but it just seems with each year it's just growing. So I think it's interesting how they're highlighting the men's collection was very well received. The women's collection always continues to be well received. The silks and textiles grew by 2%, and then the perfume and beauty grew by 7%. So the beauty line is quite new. It only really launched a couple years ago. They've had perfumes for quite some time, but they just launched the Barenia fragrance. But the area at which Hermes is struggling is in the watches category. So they're down by 6% in comparison to where they were last year. They talk about how last quarter they had specifically more events around this. When it comes to watches, I don't really think of it as Hermes' specialty. I think of leather goods, I think of silk. I can see how people would buy into like other categories to build their profile or whatever. Watches are a whole other niche level, and I just don't know if Hermes watches have that same level of collectability or really resale value as a Rolex or Cartier or Patek. And then they also mentioned how other sectors were up 17%, including the jewelry and home universe. They also highlight how they have Haute Bijouterie, sorry if I mispronounced that, which was presented in September in Beijing after Paris in June. Across the board, with the exception of watches, it's doing really well, and it's really no surprise to me. I even just see in this space on YouTube the amount of content around Hermes journeys, Hermes hauls, Hermes unboxings, what to buy from Hermes. I would not be surprised in 5 years if Hermes surpasses Chanel and even Louis Vuitton. I wouldn't be surprised. Now, when we talk about the business models, what is very interesting to me is they talk about how they have a quote, sustainable and responsible business model. They specifically mention how there is a commitment to job creation in Riom, where they have their leather goods workshop that just recently opened in September. They talk about how they're going to have 250 artisans trained locally, which is in line with what people understand and know Hermes products to be known for. are made in France and it is high quality. Not all of their products are, like they do have some products made in Italy, but for I'm sure like their specific leather goods for their bags and the saddlery, the equestrian pieces, this is where a lot of the production is. It also mentions how their S&P sustainable and responsible model was up 11 points, so there's that. It is again in stark contrast with how a lot of these other luxury conglomerates, their reports, be it from LVMH or Kering. When we look at Kering specifically, their biggest brands are struggling, the Gucci's, the YSLs, and I can only imagine they are going to put in place austerity measures, cost-cutting measures. I wouldn't be surprised if for specific brands from Kering as well as LVMH, we see layoffs, store closures. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that happen in the next year. But Hermes continues to shine because they just make really good bags. They make really good leather goods. I know some people would say they're very boring, they're classic. Hermes, I think, continues to do really well, and very interesting to me how Axel Dumas really highlights the loyalty of their customers, right? And I do see this. Like, these are some of the most loyal, some of the most passionate customer base. Louis Vuitton and Chanel probably have greater bases, but I think Hermes customers, the loyalty is so strong. It's like being in a club in a way, and I've seen people make these statements on online forums how you want to buy products to maintain your membership in a way with this brand. Like, it does feel like a club. And of course there are just specifically customers that will buy into it just for the Birkin, and there's that. But I think unlike a lot of other brands, that a lot of other customers that feel very disillusioned with what's happened at Dior, with what's happened at Chanel or Louis Vuitton or Gucci, changing creative directors and just changing the whole identity of the brand. Customers are very loyal to this brand because they kind of haven't really changed that much. Yes, they come out with bags that are more relevant for the times, but Hermes knows what it does best and just really continues to build upon that. And I think that the customer not only appreciates the design, the quality, but can have these pieces forever. That's the beauty about Hermes bags. Hermes products and Hermes scarves and leather goods, what have you. It's very much a lifestyle brand. You can really feel like you're buying into this luxury lifestyle. And for those that can afford to be in that luxury lifestyle, Hermes continues to do it really well. So yes, anyways guys, that is my video today. Thank you so much for joining me in another one, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.